Hello everyone and welcome to Plot Twists. If you're new here today, welcome. My name is Jessie and today we're going to be doing my April and May wrap up. Like previously discussed, May just kind of got crazy, so we're all going to combine them both into one video. Starting with some April book stats, I read a total of 8 books over the month of April. I read 2,898 pages, which I feel like is pretty good. Of the books I read, 7 were print and 1 was an audiobook. I read 6 full-length novels and 3 manga. 8 of them were fiction and 1 was nonfiction. I managed to read 4 fantasy, 2 sci-fi, 1 nonfiction, and 1 romance. In terms of rating, my average rating for the month was 4 stars. I had read 1 3-star book, 1 3.5-star book, 4 4-star books, and 2 5-star books. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get started. So in terms of April, what I read first this month was the first 3 volumes of Pokémon Adventures. This is a Pokemon-based manga that basically explains from the artist's perspective what they thought Pokemon should be. So it definitely hits a lot of the key points from the games in terms of characters, but the plot is very different and really enjoyable. The story centers around Reid, who is our main character. You know, you're the video games version of Ash Ketchum with this little Pikachu. But it also includes Blue, who is his rival, and Green, who is a girl, and I really appreciated that inclusion. I'm really enjoying this. As somebody who is always looking for more Pokemon in her life, this was a really enjoyable addition. I have volumes 4, 5, and 6, and 7, 8, 9 on the shelf, and I'm hoping to get to these soon because I did really enjoy it. I rated volumes 1, 2, and 3 4 stars. The next thing that I read during the month of April was Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Daniel Tatum. This is a book centering around racism in our society, but specifically from a school-based perspective. I really appreciated a lot of the commentary in this book. And especially some of the commentary is how it relates to schools and our historic system of racism in this country and how it affects kids in school. And it was a really important read, I think, as somebody who works in schools. I actually was recommended this book by a friend who's currently in grad school to become a teacher, and this was one of the books that was on their required reading, which is awesome, by the way. I really enjoyed it. If you are looking for more social justice, race-based literature that is beneficial in helping you understand better the Black experience in America, I would highly recommend this book. I gave this book 5 stars. The next thing that I read in the month of April was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This is the second book in the Hunger Games trilogy. This is a reread for me. I originally read this book back in high school and haven't read it since. Overall, I enjoyed my reread. I am enjoying my reread of the Hunger Games. I don't feel like I need to say a whole lot about this book. It definitely reads like an early YA novel, kind of exactly what you would expect. I will say this time around, when I originally read this, I would not necessarily say that I had P to hate, but I definitely did not appreciate him as much as a character as I am in this reread. And I think part of it is because of Katniss's perspective. I think the older I get, the easier it is to separate the character perspective from the actual story. And being able to do that, I think I appreciate Peeta a lot more as a character. Overall, for my reread, I gave this 3.5 stars. The next book that I finished during the month of April was Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. This is the next book that I'm reading as part of the Star Wars Canon Challenge that my other half and I are doing. This book specifically talks about the relationship between Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi as Qui-Gon is training Obi-Wan, and their differences and some challenges. I would say at the beginning of this book, I was really not feeling it. I do not feel like the author does a very good job of writing these characters in a way that's cohesive with the movies. Every time Yoda in the story said anything, it was probably the most frustrating thing I've ever experienced, because I'm sitting here going, this is wrong. This is not how Yoda talks, dude. But I did persist on because I really did want to get into the actual meat of the story. The plot of this book was really good. It did talk more about the wage disparities in the galaxy and between the poor everyday working people. It also touched on some slavery in the galaxy, which was kind of interesting. And then it gave you a perspective of the Jedi Council that I don't feel like we get as much in the movies. But also it's been a long time since I've watched any of them, and as part of this challenge, I'll be re-experiencing the lore. So maybe my opinion will change. But for now, I think that's my overall feel. I did not like the way the characters were written, but the plot was pretty good. I did end up giving this 3 stars, though, specifically because of the way the characters were written. I would say, however, if you are interested in Star Wars lore in general and the way the characters is written isn't going to drive you crazy, I think I would recommend it based on the plot. But just know that there are some definite glaring difficulties with reading it. The next book that I read during the month of April was Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This is a sapphic romance that centers around our main character, Grace, who is very much a type A personality. Everything is in line and in order, and she does things the way things are supposed to be done. And when she graduates with her PhD, she goes on a trip to Vegas, to kind of decompress because of everything that's happened, and she ends up getting married in Vegas to somebody that she's never met before. With her type A personality, this is without a doubt one of the craziest things that Grace has ever done in her life. I loved this book. Filming this in June. If you're looking for a good Pride Month read, I literally cannot recommend this enough. In addition to the fact that the plot is really enjoyable, the romance going on between the two characters as they're getting to know each other is incredible. There are multiple times this book had me tearing up because of the way they talk to each other or wrote to each other. Incredible, absolutely incredible. Cannot recommend enough. I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I have to talk about for my April wrap-up is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy. I'm not going to say too much about this because of spoilers, and I definitely don't want to spoil this because I know that this is a very highly enjoyed series, and if you haven't read this, I wouldn't want to spoil anything for you. But without giving any spoilers, I really didn't care for this book. Having finished the series now, and I will talk about Hero of Ages in a minute, I wouldn't necessarily say that this detracted from the series, but it definitely felt like a middle book filler. I feel like Mistborn is very fast-paced, and I feel like Hero of Ages is very fast-paced with a lot of things going on, and I felt like Well of Ascension was just a lot of nothing. I did appreciate the Sanderlanche at the end. There were a lot of reveals that were crazy enough that I definitely wanted to keep reading. But this took me a good portion of the month to read because I honestly was so bored with most of what I was reading. However, given how much I enjoyed the ending, I did end up giving this 5 stars. I think if I was to really rethink this now that it's been about a month, I probably would rate it 3.5 stars. Just because, like I said, it really just wasn't for me. So that ends the April portion of my wrap-up. So moving into May. May was a much slower reading month for me. And I talked about this a little in the last video, but things were just crazy over the month of May. And as a result, I didn't do as much reading as I would have liked to have done. However, I did manage to read 5 books over the course of May. 3 of those were in print, 1 in digital, and 1 audiobook. Of those books, 1 of them was sci-fi / horror. 1 was sci-fi, 1 fantasy, 1 historical fiction, and 1 general fiction. My overall average rating for this month was 4.5 stars, which is really good. I read 1 3-star book, 1 4.5-star book, and 3 5-star books. So without further ado, we will go ahead and dive right into these. The first book that I read during the month of May was Pulse by B.A. Bellec. This was actually my first ARC that I got on NetGalley. This is a sci-fi horror novel where basically imagine a world in which an Apple type company just owns everything, literally everything. Has their hands in food, housing, any sort of industry you can think of, clothes, entertainment. They're basically literally everywhere, ingrained in every part of the society. And the story actually centers on a lot of different perspectives, which in the beginning of this I found very difficult to discern and kind of remember. They are named by character names, but because there's so many, and a lot of them are not super rememberable, I found myself in the beginning flipping back a lot to be like, wait, who is this again? Oh, this is their relation to other characters. This story does evolve into a very alien-esque story, which was really cool. A lot of things about it I definitely appreciated. Some things that I found difficult, some of the writing style I found kind of more difficult to enjoy. There were definitely some sections that felt like I was being mansplained, which I've never said about a book, and I don't think I've ever felt about a book, but just some of the ways things were written, I don't know, man. It was just hard to read. Continuing on, something that I don't think is necessarily going to hold up about this book either is that there are a lot of 2020 references between referencing President Trump more than once and COVID-19. I think as this book ages, that's not necessarily going to hold up. I will say 2 of the things that I really enjoyed, I would say are probably 2 of the most important things about a book. The first is the characters themselves. The characters were incredible, dynamic, changing, diverse. You got perspectives in the story from a lot of different people, and I really enjoyed that. I also enjoyed the overarching plot. The idea that there's this company who has basically taken over at least all of America, if not all of the world. That's kind of unclear throughout the story. But basically has their pot in everything. Kind of the most extreme form of capitalism I can think of. It was wild to see how that their choices kind of leads into this alien type horror story and how that kind of divulges. Overall, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I would say that it was good, but I don't necessarily think I would ever read it again. And I don't necessarily think that I would recommend it to a whole lot of people. If you have interest in alien sci-fi horror, I think it was pretty good. I outside of that, if that's not your thing, I can't imagine a lot of people really enjoying this story. So, that's my feelings there. The next book that I read last month was probably one of my favorite books of the year, and that was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This story centers around a whole cast of characters. The book centers around Daisy Jones, who is a singer from the 70s who is trying to find her place in the world. She is very strong-willed, she is very independent, and very much wants to be a songwriter. And the industry very much does not want to let her just be a songwriter. Nobody takes her and her songs seriously, and it makes this very difficult as she's getting into the industry. It also centers around the perspectives of the Six, who are a 70s rock band who are very much up and coming. And they kind of come together based on a single that is written by Daisy Jones and the lead singer of the Six, and you know, then they come together in their band and things happen from there. There's definitely a lot going on in this story between all of the perspectives, and every single one of these characters is so well written. I literally can't emphasize that enough. The overarching plot is interesting and dynamic and constantly had me on the edge of my seat like, oh my god, what's going to happen next? There were characters I shipped and wanted to be together. There were characters that I was like, I don't know what you're doing with your life. Overall, like I said, this is probably one of my favorite books of the year. I also really like that this book is told through an interview perspective. I don't think a lot of books do that. And not just from like an interview, but this book is written like somebody was putting together a documentary of Daisy Jones and the Six, told through a series of interviews that are put together. People that I've talked to also highly recommend the audiobook. I did listen to a little bit of it, but I really, because I have a physical copy, I really did just want to read it. However, the little bit I did listen to of the audiobook was incredible. Each character in the story has a different voice actor, and I think that would make keeping the characters very easily separate. Overall, if you haven't picked this up, I highly, highly recommend this. I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I picked up last month was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is Brandon Sanderson's YA series. I don't think we know quite how many books it's going to be. But this centers around our main character of Spencer, who is desperately wants to be part of the pilot space program in the society that she lives in. The problem is her father used to be a flight captain that the society considers a traitor, and as a result, the woman who runs the military in this particular society doesn't want her to be a part of it. And through some other interactions, she does end up as part of the in the flight academy, and things kind of pick off and take up from there. In general, I loved this book. I had a feeling I would really appreciate this book because I have been enjoying what I've been reading from Brandon Sanderson, but I think in general I lead more towards YA than adult, and this gave me everything I wanted or could need. Brandon Sanderson writes sci-fi in probably one of the best ways I've ever read. His descriptions of space, of suits, of everything that's going on is to par. And I cannot wait to pick up the sequel to this month and continue on. I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read during May was Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the last book in the Mistborn trilogy. Again, I'm not going to go over too much of the plot with this one, or any of it actually, because I don't want to spoil the series, but I loved this conclusion. I'm not sure which one I enjoyed more, this or the original, the first Mistborn book, but both are really, really good. This book was gripping. There were constant plot twists. It wrapped up most of the questions that I had. It did end up posing a couple extras, but I have a feeling, knowing that there is more Mistborn books that are set in different eras, like different periods of time, I think some of those questions may be answered. I have no idea. We'll see. In general, though, the character growth that I think we see in this one is incredible. It is, what do I want to say about this? I would even say there was so much character development in some of our characters that it was more than I would have expected, and a little daunting, maybe even. But overall, I loved this book. I loved the constant plot twists. It kept me on my toes. It made me want to keep reading. I did have difficulties picking this up in the beginning, just because I really didn't enjoy Well of Ascension. But once I did pick this up, I think I read the entire 750-page book in like 3 days, because it was just that gripping. If you guys haven't read the Mistborn trilogy, I highly recommend it. I completely understand why people recommend this as a starting point for Brandon Sanderson's works. Overall, I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read in the month of May was A Man Called Uwe by Fredrik Backman. This book centers around our main character, Uwe, who is a middle-aged man who lives in a typical house in a typical neighborhood. And it basically just talks about his entire life story. There's a handful of characters that are super prevalent to the story. You learn pretty early on that Uwe's wife pretty recently passed away, and he is trying to cope with that. And near the beginning of the book, I think I can say this without this being a huge spoiler, he basically decides that he doesn't want to live without her anymore. And so he starts to plan how he is going to pass. And then over the course of the story, the characters he meets kind of changes, and things get put off. And I just really, really appreciated the story. I know there's a lot of hype around Fredrik Backman, and I didn't quite understand it. I read Anxious People before, and I enjoyed it, but it was an okay book. This was an incredible story. I liked seeing his background and his backstory and his perspective of white-collar society and how the man impacts his story. I liked seeing his backstory with his parents, and then how he meets Sonia, and kind of where the story goes from there. Overall, I rated this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And I think the more it sets on to me, the more I realize that this was a 5-star read for me as well. I just really, really enjoyed it. If you guys have been thinking about picking up any Fredrik Backman, I think this is a great place to start. Overall, I love this book. Okay, so that was a lot of books we've talked about, but that is the end of my wrap-up. If you guys liked this video, please like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. I try to post, well, at this point, I try to post at least once a week. And hopefully with summertime coming, I'll be able to jump back on that train of posting. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite book was that you read in May, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye!